Good afternoon. Joe Wenberg, Bluebird Semaphore, World History for Ordinary People, 34. And today, I thought I was done with it, but there's some things that got me about the Christopher Columbus book and its author, Samuel Eliot Morison. So, first of all, I was wondering if he was going to include a little bit of the story in the fourth voyage where Columbus and two of his ships are stranded on the south shore of Jamaica. Their hulls are have been totally eaten away by worms. They can't stay afloat. He's got them down on a beach. They can't fix it. And there's no way anybody's going to come and find them on that south shore of Jamaica. Because in the previous voyages, he had made it clear to everybody that there was no gold in Jamaica. So nobody was going to come a-looking on the south coast. So, it was over for them. So a certain group, according to Morison, decided to mutiny. And what that group did is get a couple of canoes, maybe more than a couple, and more than likely, they stole them from the Indians. Large sea-worthy canoes, because they had to cover the straits, about 100 and something miles between the eastern point of Jamaica and a western point of Hispaniola or Haiti. But they're not very successful, this mutiny group. I think they made a couple of attempts, but they got pushed back by the weather. And this is the part that I was clearly wanted to see if Morison covered. As they were being pushed back, these mutineers, their canoes were being swamped, so they were forced to throw their supplies over. They also threw the Indians. They had brought Indians with them, mostly to do the paddling, and so they threw them over. Now, a number of years earlier, I had read at least 2-volume history of this Columbus thing. And they mention this little trip that the mutineers take, but they say that upon throwing the Indians into the water, they kept them from getting back on board by slashing them with their swords. These are the Spaniards. And there's a terrible description in that book. So Morison does talk about the incident, but he doesn't talk about the Spaniards slashing them with their swords. So that always gets me concerned that somebody's misrepresenting the facts. Maybe the first book I read went a little bit overboard on the violence used by the Spanish, or maybe Morison was trying to protect the reputation of Europeans, in this case Spaniards, not wanting to make them out to be such cruel people. I don't know, but I've closed the chapter on that book. Not the chapter, but I'm pretty much done with Columbus and his 4 voyages. The fourth voyage was a significantly arduous journey along the coast of Central America, along the coast of Nicaragua, Honduras, parts of Costa Rica, the Mosquito Coast. I mean, they had nothing but rain and weather for probably up to 2 months. It was a hard voyage. And finally, everybody convinced him that he had to beat his way back up, which he did. And on that voyage, whether they're along the Mosquito Coast and they're along the coast of what would become Panama in the Panama Canal. And they did take trips inland, and if they had just persevered and gone a little further, they would have been on the top of some Cordillera, or whatever it is, mountain range, and they would have seen the Pacific Ocean. And they would have been the first to see it, not Balboa. And the history of all that region would have been, I think, significantly different if Columbus had seen the Pacific Ocean. Anyway, he didn't. He beat a track back up to Jamaica, and he does get into Hispaniola, and a few people on his side got him a couple of vessels, and he went back to Spain. And not a few years later, he passes away. Early, young man, but maybe not young for those days, in his early 50s. So anyway, that's Christopher Columbus, 500 years ago, and as they say, the rest is history. So I passed along that. I try to make a re-entry into East Asia, and what I did is I picked up with Confucius. Now everybody knows Confucius, but to be a little more particular about Confucius, his dates are 550 BC, and then the span of a normal lifetime after 550 BC. His real first name is Kong, just like in King Kong. And the Confucius is an angelicized name given to this philosopher by the West. I don't know if it's the first Jesuits who came there or whatever, but he became known as Kong. It was his real name. His real name was Kong something, the family name and so on. But the West is never happy with the indigenous cultures, and you can't seem to leave them alone. Got to change them to look like themselves, which God only knows is quite hideous. But listen, so Confucius is really just reiterating much of the philosophies that came before him. The Chinese philosophies seem to be always concerned with paying attention to history, paying attention to what worked to keep a large civilization, a large population going forward, with people getting enough to eat, with keeping the bad guys out, and so on. Figuring how to have respect between the generations, and knowing how to more or less keep things in perspective. They always championed education and learning, very big in the cultures that came before Confucius, and he just emphasized it. He may have, told them that an examination system would be the best way to go to try to make sure that the people who are going to fill the administrative positions would at least have a smattering of proper behavior, moral behavior, and show the capacity to think, because they would have examinations after a couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years of study, and they had to pass these examinations. Now, was there bribery and underhanded dealings going on in that system? Yes, just like we have in our system. As you recall recently, the rich people out somewhere, they paid the professors to give their kids scholarships in lacrosse, I think it was, because they couldn't get in on their brains. Their brains were somewhat smallish, so they got in on their ability to kick a ball around. So we have our underhandedness going on in the educational system, and so did they. Now, of course, in those times, if you came from the upper classes, you may be automatically scripted to get into these educational position slots because there was only so many. And then if you had some money, you could maybe buy a slot for your daughter, your child, mostly your son. So, and do we have the same thing going on today? Of course we do. This stuff with scholarships and giving money to poor people. I mean, that's just a cover up. The hundreds of thousands go to the best 100 colleges. Okay? The upper classes, they all go to the best colleges, and that's how the door gets open to important positions in this culture. Just because you get your son into some college that's a local community college or something like that, that doesn't mean he's set for life or she's set for life. He may have a shot at something other than a position, a lowly position that leads to nowhere, that will be such a boring. So, anyway, don't believe it for a moment that we don't have our own abuses, just like they had in China, 100 BC, not 100,000 BC, and going forward to when finally the Confucius system ended, supposedly, in early 20th century, right about the time of World War II, or maybe even earlier, let's say 1920 or something. They finally put an end to that. So, the Chinese, and this has become, in my mind, a lot more well-known recently. A very well-known book, Master Sun's Art of Warfare. And it's a little confusing in my mind right now whether that predated Confucius or not, but it was, in that general time frame. And actually, after a while, another book, Master somebody else, forget his name, he wrote a similar Art of Warfare. But the first one, Master Sun's, that's the one that everybody knows about. That's a famous book. Actually, I read that it was like the most famous ancient Chinese book. The most. And it wouldn't surprise me if indeed it is. That book scripts how generals and emperors should conduct warfare. And it's such common knowledge. I mean, being prepared, having a good plan, having good espionage, keeping your troops healthy, keeping them always keeping their stamina up. All these things that we continue to do to this day. Now, in World War II, the Western people who were trying to help China beat back the Japanese, they couldn't understand it. China would not attack. Not attack. And there was a lot of excuses for it. But in this Art of Warfare, Master Sun says you don't have to go to war until you know the outcome is going to be positive. You don't. So they could, in World War II, the Chinese did not know if the outcome was going to be positive. Also, they wanted to make sure that their troops didn't get annihilated, because when World War II was over, no matter which way it went, the Chiang Kai-shek, who was the guy who was not going to war, who wasn't going to attack, he wanted to have his troops in the ready to go fight the rebels. So, for a variety of reasons. Now, in the Art of Warfare, they stated clearly that, you have to be prepared, you have to have a plan, and you have to carry out the rituals of planning for warfare. The big-time generals, they would have meetings after meetings after meetings. They would meet in temples. They would conduct rituals and read omens, all that sort of thing, although they put more stock in being prepared and having knowledge of the enemy. They they talk considerably about guerrilla warfare, which, Mao Tse-tung certainly took to heart. He read, he would be a vast reader of that book, and his armies were all about guerrilla warfare. So the Chinese didn't do it, to the exasperation of the Americans and other allies like the British and so on, because we figured that they could have beat back Japan on Chinese soil with our assistance. That could have been the outcome. But they didn't do it, and I think it's because they wanted a reserve to be able to go after the Chinese rebels, which wind up being the communists and Mao Zedong and his gang. So that's the story on China that I got this far, this last little bit of reading. And the last little bit of reading, I also believe that I'm bringing to an end the old so-called investigation why the war in the Pacific became the war in the Pacific. It's really very simple. The Japanese wanted Netherland East India, or Dutch East India, however you want to say it. They wanted that piece of geography because they wanted the oil, and also because they wanted the people to bring back to Japan, to work the factories, to make the little boy Japanese go to war and go kill everybody. So that was the basic root cause for World War II. But what was the root cause for that? Was that Japan had decided it was going to dominate the world. So the reason why the war in the Pacific became the war in the Pacific is because Japan wanted world dominance. They wanted to be the one and only power on the planet. That's what she wanted. Now, how could a country, a nation, be so delusional? I don't know. You know, you can't even keep a 8,000 people township working in unison and being successful. What kind of delusionary people are in that country and thinking they're going to dominate the world? What were they? Ex-Germans? Come on, it's insane. Or ex-English? Come on. You're not going to dominate this planet until you get an H-bomb pointed at every nation on the planet. I take that back. That's a terrible statement. But you see how delusional they were? They were immensely delusional. Immensely. And then they go tell their little boys, okay, get in your plane and go kill yourself. All right? And you other guys, you stay on Iwo Jima and get killed. Okay? That's what you do. Unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. So, not to go on and on and on, but back in the Far East, and of course the Silk Road, which you've heard me talk about the Silk Road before, is part of that. And, you know, people always, the historians always talk about the exchange of ideas east to west because of the Silk Road, you know. And I came across a little thing that I wanted to reiterate because I thought it was pretty keen, pretty cool, is that I forget who it was. I should remember this. I don't know. Actually, I got a couple of things about this. But it may have been one of the disciples of Confucius. Because they were saying, you know, well, what should we do? How should we treat this type of ruler, that type of governor, this and that? So whoever it was, whether it was Mencius or somebody else in that time frame in China talking about this, they said, well, this is the way it should be. These people that you're talking about, how we should treat them, what they need to do, a governor needs to be a governor, a father needs to be a father, a son needs to be a son. All these types, that's what they need to be. Okay? a philosopher needs to be a philosopher. A temple priest needs to be a temple priest. And that's the way you run society. So, with this exchange of ideas, east to west, I immediately thought of the statement in the New Testament. Somebody asks Jesus, well, how do you make satisfy the needs of the government and the needs of the people? And the needs of God. So you got the big time rulers, and then you got God in the heavens, right? So the answer by Jesus is give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and give to God the things that are God, or give to the Father the things that are Father. But the point is, I see that as a very similar response that Confucius had come up with, quite some time earlier. And it's east and west, and these ideas traveled primarily along the Silk Road, which, went with fingers into the continent of Asia in many directions. It wasn't just one little road. It wasn't like Highway 1 along the East Coast. It was all these roads in and out of the various regions. And people came and people talked. All different philosophies, different religions, different cultures, different ethnic groups. And that idea should not be hidden. It should be out there and as amplified as possible. Because unfortunately, for so many centuries, we think in terms of there never was anything but the theologies that we think of as our own. Never were philosophies other than the ones we think of as our own. These things all, in my estimation, are a conglomeration of ideas that came from all over the place. Even today, I'm playing the piano, and as you know, I promised to get some Christmas music on the old Bluebird, and half the songs in these songbooks are about the East, So my point would be that there's an Eastern thing going on as well as a Western thing, and this has nothing to do with diversity. Nothing that's going on today. It's the only topic you hear on the radios and television, and everywhere you go, it's always diversity, diversity, diversity. But the point is, the mixing of East and West took place over thousands of years, with many, many people legitimately sitting down and legitimately having discussions and talks and amicably moving on and exchanging those ideas with other people in an amicable fashion, with nobody browbeating them and stuffing their brains with information that they wanted them to have. This was a voluntary exchange of ideas, not what we have today, with governments all over the planet stuffing ideas in people's heads for the purpose of taking over every individual for the total control of everything. That's what we have now. And they're just using diversity as one of their props. So whether you buy into it or not, I really don't care. What I do care is that you understand the exchange of ideas, East and West, was an amicable, a honorable sit down, talk, discuss, see the similarities, see the differences, and then, fold up your tent, move on, have some of those discussions with other people in a amicable way. And if we could only mimic that, we'd be on the right path. But right now, we're not. We're not on the right path in any shape or form. Look at what the big tech companies are doing. The big tech companies are giving you the news, not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, not the Daily News, not U.S. News and World Report, not the Economist, okay? The freaking big technology companies. I could just see them sitting up there in corporate offices making the news story for the day. That's wrong. That's wrong. They don't have the credentials to collect the information, sort out what's true, what's not true, what needs to be disseminated and moved along. They're not reporters. They're not in the business of publishing, of being what people were in for centuries when they were in the business of journalism, of literature, etc., etc., etc. They're technologists. That's technologists. And they're social engineers. Okay? It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Anyway, what was this? Yeah. One little thing here, I think. No, that was it. The last thing was the thing about the Silk Road. So, once again, the more I make these videos of world history, it seems like the more I get into screaming, because, you keep uncovering. What about this? I've had, I think the last 3 or 4 had some piece of it was about deforestation, right? So what happens this period? I'm looking at Mencius. He's the guy after Confucius, and he's got an analogy. He's trying to teach his disciples about what's human nature. What is human nature? He says, what is it? He says, if I have a thing, and I don't know what the thing is, but if somehow you change it, is it still that thing? What is its nature? I mean, we could maybe use the analogy of Columbus's boats that were eaten by worms and couldn't stay afloat anymore. Are they still boats? He would ask that question. Somebody would say, well, yeah, they're still boats because they still retain a look, a resemblance, the nature of a boat. But somebody else would say, no, they can't float, so they're not a boat. All right, but Mencius used the analogy of Ox Mountain. Ox Mountain was a mountain with beautiful trees on it near a large city. So the people over the years came to that mountain with the beautiful trees, and there were a lot of people around it because it was near a city. They came with their axes and hatchets, according to Mencius, and eventually all the trees were cut down, and essentially to the point of appearing to be clear stripped. However, Mencius says, but these trees were strong trees, and there was rain, etc., and there was fertile ground, and these trees sent up new shoots. Okay, lovely new shoots. But what did the people do? The people sent their cattle and their animals to go feed off the new shoots, and they ate all of that until the ground was bare, and there was no ability for the forest, the original forest and the original beautiful trees, to regenerate. So Ox Mountain became just a big heap of stone and dirt, no longer a mountain. So he says, what was it now? Was it still a mountain or wasn't it a mountain? What was its nature? What is the nature of Ox Mountain? With trees and after being deforested. So, it seems like every time I open up the history books, I'm going to read something about deforestation. No, and I already see it, because as I move along, if I get into Eastern Europe, the Polands of the world and the Ukrainians of the world, and all the ones in between, they're like already totally deforested, and yet I've seen some things up on the internet around in these places I've been talking about, Eastern Europe and Russia, European Russia, and these are contemporary little videos and photos, and I see trees around the rivers and so on. So, there's hope. But what I've read about Poland's totally deforested. And once that happens, I mean, in order to get it back to its original mix of trees and shrubs and so on, it would take hundreds of years and very, very knowledgeable scientists to get the right mix of genetics over a period, over a piece of land, and encourage it to grow in a certain way so that the original forest would come back. We look over here and you can look at New Hampshire. When I was playing New Hampshire, I was reading that 95% of the original wood was all cut off. New Hampshire, yeah, we go there. There is a great forest. This is a great, great forest. Yeah, but it's not the original forest. And of course, that's throughout this land. The eastern woodland, from say western Pennsylvania or Indiana, all the way through to the East Coast, the coastal plain, I guess they would call it. That was once total forest, dense, thick, total forest. Not anymore, just at the higher elevations as you go through Pennsylvania and Maryland, Virginia, higher elevations. But other than that, all gone. All gone. That's what we do. There's something in our genes that doesn't like a tree. We could make a poem. There's something in our genes that doesn't like a tree. So get your axe, Bobby, and cut them down with me. Hey, listen, I'll see you next time. Maybe I'll stop acting like a jerk, but we'll see what happens, okay? Bye.